and welcome to another episode of the Inspiring Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Pursue, a bespoke leadership coaching and development company with a mission to create, nurture and develop inspiring leadership across the global education sector and beyond. My name is Nicholas Mackay, Associate Professor, Certified Professional Coach and Director of Pursue, and I'll be your host as we bring you cutting-edge leadership stories from across the world, delving into the minds of recognised education and industry experts to find out about the challenges and main issues they are facing and to gain insights into inspiring leadership. In this series, we are proud to be in partnership with Independent School Management Plus and International School Magazine, the leading authority and voice for professionals in independent and international education worldwide. If you'd like to watch the video of today's podcast, please just head over to schoolmanagementplus.com. We are also supported by the Federation of British International Schools in Asia, a diverse and inclusive community of 78 leading British international schools across the Asia region. Many thanks for your continued engagement and feedback across the podcast platforms. And if you'd like to join the Pursue conversation, you can visit us on our website, pursue.com, LinkedIn and Twitter at Nicholas Mackay and Pursue. So in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Sue Aspinall. Sue is the head teacher of the junior school Vlaskamp, the British school in the Netherlands. Over the last 20 years, Sue Aspinall has been leading schools through significant change, intent on raising the quality of learning and teaching available to her students. Having been both the head of an inner London state school and 3 British international schools based in different countries, Sue knows how it is to live a global life and transition between cultures and across countries. As the lead facilitator at the British School of the Netherlands International Leadership Academy, Sue has been providing impactful learning experience for leaders who want to make a difference. Sue, thank you so much for joining me today from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Nick. Really pleased to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on board. So today, as I always do, asking the question to kick off our session today, our interview, our discussion, is what's your definition of inspiring leadership?
Inspiring leadership for me can happen through the work of an individual or a team or a big gathering of people. And in the school context for me, that is a leadership that is absolutely and utterly focused on student outcomes and getting the best for our young people. And I think the inspirational element of it is when you've got a person or a group of people who just have a vision or an aspiration for what young people can do, achieve, or the kind of culture that you can create to enable those students to really do their best, and then sets out to start achieving that. And, that can be something quite small that's achieved quite quickly. But I think when I look at the real inspirational leadership around me, it's the people who keep on going and have a relentless pursuit, I guess, of that vision that they set out to achieve and are prepared to kind of like recalibrate it as they go along. But just keep going against the odds for what they know young people deserve. And and in terms of having that around, it's for a head teacher, having examples of that around you just is so uplifting and helpful in keeping you going in your own job as well.
You've been in your post. Well, how long have you been in your post for now? Your current post, Sue?
The current post I've been in for just over 8 years.
Okay, so about 8 years. So I suppose in terms of building something, you're quite maybe far down the line. So if you take your mind back to the embryonic stages of building that culture, what did you have to do to kind of kickstart that?
I remember when I first visited the school that I'm in now, I walked through the door, and by then I'd already got a sense that there was work to do. I was picking that up through the communication that I was having with people who were already in the organisation and kind of the wording and the responses really. And then I remember walking through the door and seeing the students and getting a sense of possibility and potential. When I walked around the school, I just felt really sad actually for the students, because I knew that there was so much more that they wanted and needed out of school life, and for some reason that hadn't been realised. So in my that's what inspired me to apply for the job. It was that seeing that there was tremendous potential and having a sense that I felt I could do something about that. And then you kind of make the leap in, because you've got to find out what the ingredients are like that are there, who's there, what might be getting in the way, what are the barriers. And for the first 2 terms that I was in the school, I was basically troubleshooting all day long. You know, that's usually what happens when a school's unstable, and basically, you know, you're coming in just to stabilize it. But the fantastic nature of that was I started in January. So I had 2 terms before the beginning of the next academic year. And I would advocate, if you're going to a new headship, that's really great timing, because you've got a chance to really get to know the context, what's going on, building relationships, getting to know the children, getting to know their names, getting into the classrooms. And what I did was spend that time being as open, friendly, professional, and setting the stall out really of how I wanted adults to be around the students in this particular school. And then I was recruiting, and I recruited my first deputy, who he was extraordinary actually in terms of a partnership that we created, because it was together we were able to create a vision of what we knew was possible in that school. We didn't know kind of how we were going to get there, but we knew these students could do extraordinary things, and as adults we needed to get that right. And then in the September, I mean, I kind of shocked the staff a little bit, because I'd kind of been very accommodating, and I'd been on this exploration with them for 2 terms. And then in September, it's like, right, this is what you're not going to do. This is what you're going to do. And these are the non-negotiables, you know. and I was bringing some clarity, really. And although that was hard for some of the staff that had been in that school for a number of years, I think that there were enough people who could see that that's what was needed. And then once we started setting those basic parameters in place, like, you know, behavior expectations, intrinsic reward as being our main, how children were expected to be in the classroom as learners. It was that really, it was about expectations for the students and between adults. Yeah. And then we built from there.
It's really interesting, isn't it? How you say getting to know people, being very open, being very smiling, and then suddenly once you've got all the information, okay, now we need to do something about it. Yeah. So if you're looking back to give some advice to yourself around that, Sue, you know, what advice would that be, transitioning from the initial, say, 90 days, 100 days into that more ensconced role?
I think probably at the beginning when I came, you know, I invested a lot of time in relationships, and I would say to myself, you know, that keep that in place, because that is absolutely key. You're building trust, and you're building the bedrock really for the development of the time. I think I would have spent a lot more time getting advice outside of the BSN actually, and maybe invested someone to work with me earlier. I did that later on actually, but in those first 2 terms, I made an assumption that I would get more support within, and I hadn't appreciated that the colleagues that worked within the BSN at that time hadn't had the opportunity to see what was really going on in this particular school. So having a mentor or a coach or someone who can be objective and talk with you about how your next steps might be would have been a good first move. And then I did find myself troubleshooting a lot, you know, like having to finish contracts on the spot, that kind of thing. And it's hard going, and you question, have I made the right move? That's what was happening to me in those first months. So until I settled myself as well, and I think that's something that maybe all heads go through when it's tough, and it's the beginning of your tenure, you are questioning, is this the right move? And I think for me, if I'd put in more support for myself, I think it would have helped me ground myself quicker and maybe made those first months a bit easier to manage. Yeah.
I suppose in terms of support for yourself going forward, you mentioned that you did get some and maybe outside support. What made you, what ignited that later or further down the line?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, really, because I was quite strategic in who I reached out to, because I realized that there were elements of support I needed with regard to kind of knowledge that I just didn't have. So I reached out to an HR consultant, for example. I needed help with assessment, so I reached out for someone for that. I needed some legal advice, so I reached out for that. So I kind of like set up like a mini senior team that was just for me. And I remember feeling terribly guilty doing that, thinking, well, the organization I work with has all that. But I just didn't feel that I could have open conversations with the people from within. And it was giving myself permission, I guess, to ask for that support from outside. And then I also paid for someone who was a professional coach for me, and someone who would listen to me and ask posing questions and keep me uplifted. Actually, that's what I found was the most important role that they had in those early stages. Yeah.
It's strange, isn't it? Something the people that I coach, especially senior leaders internationally, there's a little bit of guilt about asking for support, maybe outside of what the school's providing, or there's maybe some guilt about actually having and ring fencing time for yourself.
Yeah.
And it's been spoken about a lot, isn't it? That it's key to have that time away, whether that's formulating a strategy or just to sort of, I don't know, just let a bit of steam off, whatever it is. I think that's more applicable and important than it ever has been, I think. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, and I think I'm speaking just for myself here, but particularly over the last 18 months or the last year, when we've been so head down in operational stuff, and when I don't think I'm alone in working incredibly long hours and just having to, because the government gives you announcements, you've got to turn it around in a couple of days. And so just managing that extraordinary kind of reactive way of leading is not our normal. It's not our normal behavior and way of coping. So trying to balance that with giving time to yourself, making sure you get enough sleep, all of that is really important. I mean, I've just been so fortunate in that my deputy and my senior team have always been there. And, that's another advice that I would give to myself, but also to other heads, is try as soon as you can to get the right people on the bus in your core senior team. Because when you go through a critical stage like we've just been in the last year, if you've got that team in place and you work really, really well together, and these are action orientated people as well, you can get through it so much more easily. And it's a credit to my team. They've just been extraordinary, the way they've pulled together. Yeah.
You mentioned now that the key maybe appointments of your deputy. So when you're looking at getting people, as you mentioned, on the bus in your senior team, what kind of characteristics are you looking for in people?
For the particular school that I'm in now, with the first deputy that I appointed, Chris Bailey, it was really important to me that he was an outstanding teacher and just knew how to get the best out of our students, and particularly our older ones, because that's where we had some issues. And he was just able to do that, because of his experience, and he'd come from the state sector as well, and just had such a repertoire of skill. But I also needed people who knew how to sort of relate to and motivate and enthuse our kids who don't take any nonsense, you know, they can suss it out immediately. Well, any children can, but you know, I'm particularly interested in teachers who have a passion about a subject knowledge, or you know, have traveled and can relate to them in with those kind of life skills, I guess. And what Chris was able to do as well was, he had a music background, and one of the things that we needed to do in the school where I am is create a sense of community. It was quite a compartmentalized school, and we did that through singing. Everybody sang, and you know, he would have like year groups singing sessions, whole school singing sessions, and I just wanted the students to really get a sense of what it was like to belong to something bigger than them, and to be able to create something absolutely fantastic. And that's what, you know, that was one of the things that he was able to do, was to create that kind of uplifting atmosphere in the school, and something that every child could be a part of. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, as you probably know, my background's in music, so I used to be a professional bassoonist back in the day. I went to music college, and the first teaching that I did was music teaching. And subsequently, I worked with trainees around music, and all these reports come out saying, you know, there's not enough music and music lessons, like Ofsted report in 2011, still wider. Then 2019, the parliamentary report, there's still enough music in schools. So in terms of getting singing in there, I mean, it takes, you know, real presence and someone to actually get everyone engaged in singing, because even specialist musicians find that difficult with students and children.
Yeah. And it's good you mentioned that, actually, because one of the things we talked about when Chris was first appointed was we needed to really help our teachers see what expectation you could have from students around behaviour.
Right.
And I think, you know, if you've got a whole year group choir that is being led by somebody who is passionate about music, but can hold the behavior level of every single child in that group. I mean, our year groups are like 100 plus. So, you know, what he was doing actually very subtly was demonstrating relentlessly the expectation he had for every single child in terms of their behavior for learning. And it's, you know, saying to them, you know, that singing is accessible to everybody. You can do it. You don't have to just, you know, all this cool dude stuff. Like it's just like, you know, I'm doing it, you do it.
You do it.
and it took time. I mean, you know, this was something that had to be built up. That's the culture building, you know. And there were times when he would just stop it and say, you're not in the right place, you know, we need to get our attitude here, our mindset right. And then, you know, if they weren't singing well enough, they were stopped, and he would go through what he wanted to get from them. So he was kind of definitely modeling to all the adults, but also to the children, about what the expectation was. And then, of course, you know, he had to support him really good musicians. So, you know, I've got music teachers who could just improvise and slot in and just keep that background music going. So you can't do it on your own, I don't think. You've got to have a duo, or two at least teachers who are at the front helping create that atmosphere. And then we brought the teachers in to sing with the children as well, so that it was a whole collective year group, I don't know, coming together every week. So it just became part of what you did in the school. And I mean, Chris is no longer with us now, but that element of community, we've lost that a little bit, actually, with you know, the safety measures that we've got to put in place at the moment. And it'll be one of the first things that we bring back when we're able to mix the kids again. Yeah.
And you mentioned, it's fascinating stuff there about, you know, the underlying rationale and reasoning and the impact that the music and the choir had. But in terms of other things you think you've lost during the last year and the difficulties around the pandemic, you know, what are some of the things that come to mind too?
I think, I mean, the children would say it's playtimes, because the playtimes are zoned, you know, they play with their year groups rather than across the years. And the school where I am, we have this amazing grounds at the back, lots of space, it's green, and the children can move around at playtime. And I think what they miss is meeting their brothers and sisters and their friends that they've got in different year groups. And that really adds value to their experience at school, particularly for the older children, because they love playing with the younger children and just all that they learn from each other as peers. So, you know, we've got our year ones as sort of like, some of them are obsessed with Pokemon and, you know, Ninja playing and all these other games that they've got. And it's great. But I know if there was a mixture of ages, they would get those games diverted into other things more quickly. So I think they're missing that. Certainly, you know, there's some of the offer that we provide we've not been able to do to the level that we would normally, like Dutch, for example, because our Dutch teachers normally teach across the year groups. And at the moment, we've assigned one to each year group, and they're mixed ability teaching. So we're missing some of that, but also the teachers are getting very skilled at teaching Dutch to a mixed ability group. So that might be something we have to look at later, something we've learned from it. I think from the staff's point of view, they've really enjoyed being in their little pods. So a year group of staff working together very closely and having their own staff room and chit-chatting about, you know, what they're doing within their year group. But I'm really aware that we've broken that whole school perspective, and we'll need to do a lot more work when we get back to something where we can mix more, where we have shared staff meetings and professional learning time together, and the breadth of understanding starts to come back into our conversations. Yeah.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? So again, I suppose I'm putting you on the spot here a bit, Sue, but how are you going to facilitate the wider connections or the reconnections throughout your school community?
A lot, well, as soon as the measures relax more, the first thing we will do is get the curriculum back up and running for the students and that playtime, and opportunities for our teachers to come back into mixed year group discussions, so that we start to revisit some of our key pedagogical principles and get those conversations broadened out. And then the other aspects are parents, because at the moment they trot round the outside of the building, you know, and I mean, one thing we will keep is our online parent-teacher conferences. Those work like a dream. But we need to find a way to get the parents more connected into the school building and into the community in a physical way. And I think we'll probably do that through like class assemblies, where the children are discussing their learning and the parents are there. That's a small step forwards, building it up to small concerts, and then gradually doing it that way. But we've had no events or anything like that. So it's those kind of things that I'm just really keen to bring back in again. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it, about the parent consultations, parents' evenings, and to all the schools I work with, it's been a game changer. Why didn't we think about this before? It's obvious. It's worked brilliantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we always thought that it was because they'd love to see us as a teacher in our classroom, you know, with all the children's books out. The parents are just saying, all I want to do is be able to hear about my child from you while I'm juggling everything else. And it just so makes sense. And particularly with our parent body, where often, you know, one parent's working in one country and one's working at home or whatever. And now we can actually have both parents together in that conversation. So it's so much more focused and just has a professionalism around it that I think, you know, we've just learned is a way of maximizing time. And so now I think what we'll do is we'll have more concentrated time with parents online, but we'll do slightly more so that, you know, they get more regular check-ins with the class teacher, but it's short, very focused, online, and they're just able to pop into that call from work or wherever they are. Yeah.
So how frequent do you think they're going to be then, Sue?
Well, we're talking about them every term. I mean, we were only doing our parents' evenings twice an academic year, so
Right.
it's having that check-in every term. And I think what's happened is the teachers actually are so used to speaking to parents through, we use Teams, that it's going to be much more spontaneous. You know, when there's a need, they'll have a call and they'll just do a check-in. And I know that's happening. It's starting to just happen organically. So that relationship with the parent is much more, it's just more spontaneous now. I mean, they used to do the face-to-face at the school gate or, you know, at the classroom door, but that isn't as flexible for those people who are working. Whereas this way, it just includes anybody and everybody.
Yeah,
So,
you can get in touch when you want. I'm
absolutely.
really interested here, Sue, to unpick a little bit more about the work that you do in the International Leadership Academy, where you're the lead facilitator. So
Yeah.
you can just take our listeners just through what it is and what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, the International Leadership Academy was established, I think, about four or 5 years ago now by, we recruited Liz Free to be the director of it. And the concept was to bring together, form some partnerships with some key providers that we consider to be of a really high quality and able to provide for the international context, so that we could deliver a leadership series of programs. So that was the NPQH. It was the cash programs for our support staff, first aid, a range of courses which in the past staff from our school had been going over to the UK to attend and had been accessing a kind of whole range of providers, and there wasn't necessarily a quality assurance around that or a kind of generalization that would support the BSN's priorities. So what it brought was a high quality at a much more cost-effective way. The providers would come to us so we could get our delegates in a room together. And for the BSN staff, some of them, they just don't see each other during the school day. So being in the room together helped them understand the organisation and share practice more as well. And then the idea was that we would offer this out to other international schools as well. So we built up a network from international schools within the region, and it meant they could send delegates to The Hague rather than obviously to the UK or try and bring people out to their schools. And for smaller schools, it just wasn't feasible financially, whereas they could do that by coming to us. And what we also did was arrange it so that we managed some kind of discount arrangement for people who were prepared to come and facilitate alongside us and send delegates. So it was kind of a sustainable way, really, of keeping those programs going. And what we're moving towards now is augmenting all of that provision by taking the expertise from within our schools. So looking for practitioners and leaders within the BSN who, you know, are really showing high quality and giving them a platform to share that out to other colleagues and then to people in other international schools where that's relevant as well. So that'll be the next piece of work that we want to do, is look at, you know, our areas of school improvement, look within to see who's exemplifying that in a way that is going to be helpful for other people to know about, and almost train and grow within as well. So we'll keep some of our really established programs, which we've very subtly kind of morphed the content so that it suits the international content. So like the NPQ suite, we think we do that brilliantly, actually, because we've been able to use the content, but actually give it that richness and breadth to suit our international context as well. And the cash program as well. I mean, that's been developed online as well as for face-to-face delegates. So it's kind of like always evolving learning experiences for colleagues so that they get the most out of the time that they're together. That's our real driver. Yeah.
And you have people, I suppose, in this world that everyone's on Zoom and Teams, beaming in from all over the world, I presume.
Well, that's where it's going. I mean, I was just talking to you earlier about how, Liz has moved on now, and she's the CEO of a school in her own right in Switzerland. But I'd asked her to help with our MPQH and just talk to delegates about, what is it really like in your first weeks as a leader. And she beamed in on Zoom, and spoke to them about her experiences, which was fantastic. And in the room on that particular day, online from Malaysia, was one of the delegates as well. So using technology in such a way that you can facilitate that flexibility is just fantastic. And we would never have done that in the first months that we were running the ILA. Just wouldn't have, we wouldn't have thought about it. Whereas now we're thinking all the time about how can we make this as accessible as possible to as many people. And that makes you really think about, well, okay, what am I going to do when I've got the delegates face to face to add value? So it's always about discussion, focused conversations, feeding back maybe on case studies and work that they've done away from the training room, so that they learn from each other, but also in a more experiential way. And then the work they're doing outside of the training room is very much their own research and their work in practice. So it's really thinking carefully about how you make that work to maximize impact for students and the development of the leader.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think there's so many discussions going on at the moment about what do you actually need to do face to face, and what can actually people go and do away, in their own time, flexibly. The same, teacher training, the same thing at the moment. Any leadership courses, as you said, all these things it's getting you to think, I think, in a different way. And in some respects, how lean can you be with the time that you have, and what's actually important to get across, rather than just to kind of ramble around and spend an afternoon just sort of pontificating when actually not actually being sharp on certain themes.
Yeah, that's certainly the way we're working at the moment. Is you've got these periods of time, and we were having to postpone a lot of our face-to-face sessions as well. So when we were able to meet, it was like golden time. And so you just had to make sure that every minute counted. And what we found that people needed was space. They just needed headspace. They needed opportunity to learn from each other, but around very focused topics. They needed feedback from us as facilitators. So that was really key. So, like the coaching you do, we were finding we were having to coach on the spot and give those learning tools straight away to enable people to then go back into school and already have shifted in their thinking and in their leadership, but also holding people to account. I mean, particularly when everyone was working remotely, it's so easy to get into a different mode and to lose momentum. And so we've put in a lot of checks in between the times when we see people face to face, much more sort of like coaching calls at a certain time when we'll be asking them to come prepared to talk about this. And they're finding that helpful in just keeping on track. I
think that's a key thing, so totally around this idea of, okay, everything's great being flexible, but people, they like the communication, they like to know that somebody's there. And it's about, I suppose, when you're delivering a program, as you know, it's not there all the time. You've got to manage that, because people at the moment are ringing you all sorts of times, aren't they? Because the flexibility can get a bit too much. But I think it's crafting opportunities for people to check in, to feel like they're not isolated. And I think that's a key issue, I think, with a lot of these online programs.
And I mean, adding to that, I mean, the check-ins are the time when you really get to understand the person, and what they're really going through and what their challenges are. And they're so different and unique. And I've found that really, really helpful to really understand where they are in their leadership journey, what are the challenges that are getting in the way, what's working well, helping them build on that. and then just those nudges that you can give to help them move forwards. And you learn yourself, you're constantly learning from what they're telling you, how you can develop and change the programs so that they can get the most out of it. And at the moment, so much of it is evolutionary. We're on this kind of big change model at the moment, and it's really important to invest in that time and listen to what people are needing, what you can do best. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I love it.
It all comes round, because what you said at the beginning of our conversation about the real importance of effective and fruitful conversation and dialogue, which I'm fascinated by. And I think I've noticed with the coaching that I do is people have never been more open and been more willing to be personal and vulnerable. And sometimes that's just the sheer fact that you're speaking to someone, not in an office face to face, but in the actual home, the residence. You're seeing maybe their kids come on a call that you'd never even have known, for example. They're in a place where you can sort of have a little bit of a portal into their life. And I think people are craving that, because they haven't been together, craving that personalization of things. Which does lend itself, as you said, to the mentoring side, to the coaching side, to the checking in side, all the way through, whether it's a course or whether it's for a job or any interactions at the moment.
Yeah. And I think it's the same. I mean, as a head, I'm very privileged to the private life of a lot of our parents. And during this time, I mean, many of our parents as clients have been going through financial difficulties, and you get a sense of it from the behavior of the children, or, you just get a sense that things are tense or not okay. And, it's something that you can't overestimate as a head, is that you are someone so trusting to many of our families. They know you understand confidentiality. They know you understand what might be happening in their world. And for many of them, they've got nobody else to turn to. So, for example, when the schools were closed, I was always on campus, and I had parents in and out of my room all the time. And it was almost like a therapy session, But I think it was really important to them that they knew that I was here, and they didn't abuse that. They would just say, I'd say to them, look, you can come and speak to me face to face if you're comfortable with that, or we'll do it on Teams. And invariably they'd come in, and we'd be sitting on opposite side of the room, but there was something about that physicality of and the privacy of the space, and then it would all come out, all the issues at home, their worries, and what do I do? What advice can you give me? La la la. And I mean, you can't solve all the problems or anything, but I think just providing that safe space where they can offload and cry, or ask for the first step of how to solve something, or even just, for most it was talking about money problems. And for me, just to listen to that and say, yeah, I understand. Okay, these are the options you might have. And it just helps them go away and then think more pragmatically, I guess, about what next steps might be. Yeah.
How do you keep this kind of distance? I mean, I speak to head teachers, I said, all around the world, and some of them get a little bit overwhelmed with parents lining up at the door and discussing things like the financial issues that they've got. They haven't got a job anymore. Issues with the students being at home, these kind of things. And it can be a little bit, because again, it's not just about the student, it's about the actual family. So how do you ensure that you don't get overwhelmed within all this? So,
well, I think what I reflected on was that it's kind of knowing the emotion of your community, really, because I know when we first needed to close the school and remote learning started, I had an avalanche of communication from parents, and I think you did, about you're not doing live lessons and la la la, and it's knowing that that's a natural stage in parents coming to terms with something that they've never done before, and kind of riding it out. And so what my colleagues and I did, we had what we called scripts, You know, we found a way to communicate with parents in a personal way, but we had a commonality in that. So it's common messages going back, reassuring, but the lines here. And then in terms of like the face-to-face work I was doing, it was the families that I knew were most vulnerable, and that if I didn't do that, there would be more likely an impact on the kids. So it's kind of choosing it carefully, really. And then you've always got those parents that are always at you. You know, there'll be the name all the time, and you just have to give them time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of knowing your community, really, and knowing the pits and troughs that they're going through as well. It's nothing to do with you as a head. That's just your community trying to make sense of what's happening. And I think, you know, it's having the trust that in the long term, they will start to trust you and the school in whatever the situation is. So, for example, with the remote learning and the coming back to school and all of that, like I think we're really lucky now because our parents really trust us, and they really trust that the decisions we're going to be making are in the best interest of them and their child. And they might not like some of it, but that's how it is. So I can have a laugh now with some of the parents, and you know, they'll be whinging on about the fact that they're still having to pay for something that's being offered remotely and not in school. And I'll just say, well, you know, there's not a lot I can do about that, really. So, you know, it's how it is. So yeah, I get it. I get your point, but this is how it is. And you can, you know, you get to a point where you can just laugh about it. Yeah.
Now, before your current role, so you were, was it you in Tokyo?
Yeah.
And how long were you in Tokyo for?
I was there for 6 years. Yeah.
And you were the head of the British School Tokyo?
I was the head of primary. So it's a 3 to 18 school. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've spent quite a few years now on the international circuit. So what kind of keeps you going?
For me, it's that real interest in what is it that we can do best for our students, and that changes all the time. I'm absolutely relentless in looking at standards, but also the breadth of experience for students. So it's the need to have a really high quality, excellent education. But how does that have to keep developing and changing to meet the needs of the students and the world they're in? So it's fascinating, and it's having that interest and just in the craft, really. I love, in the international community, I love the nature of our students, the fact that they're just so, I mean, they're just so smart and worldwide and, you know, adaptable and flexible. And they're going to be a generation of children and young people, definitely now having gone through what they've gone through, where, you know, I know they'll be able to take on so much more than like my generation or the one coming after me, just because they've learned to adapt and be flexible and be open-minded and learn and work alongside people from all over the world. For them, it's just normal and natural. So that I find fascinating. I'm really interested in the kind of people who want to work internationally as well. So it's usually professionals who, again, are really open to learning and developing their teaching, but are also at the top of their game, and are prepared to take risks and be open to new opportunities as well. So that's something I found fascinating. And my team here all change every year. You know, we've got a 10% mobility, which is pretty good for a senior, you know, it's pretty stable for an international school.
Yeah.
But you're constantly every year having to reshape your teams, reestablish your culture, and constantly look at what is the next thing that you need to do to keep viable as a business more than anything else, you know. So yeah, there's a lot that keeps me going, and I you know, I love the nature of our work, which is, you know, it's transferable. We can go to another country and another, like for me, British curriculum school. And yeah, the delivery of the curriculum's the same, and your client group might have similarities, but you've then got the contextual situation to get your head around. And there's nothing more complex than working in Japan, or here in Holland, actually, quite frankly. So wherever you go, it's
what's the hardest?
trying to understand like how to make it work.
Is it Japan or the Netherlands, which has been the hardest?
Sorry?
Is it Japan or the Netherlands, which has been the most difficult?
They're yeah, very different reasons for both, actually. In Japan, it was it's the fact that in Japan, if you want to develop any kind of partnership, it takes years. And I mean, you know, the staff who are still at the BST are getting ready for the opening of a new primary school in the city. Well, I was involved in that, and I was there like in 2006. So it's like years and years and years and years and years of relationship building, and that's cultural. You know, it's trying to build up trust and confidence in your partners, and it takes time. And then obviously the kind of nature of how your school can operate in the countries you're in is different, and you've got to understand the financial setup, the legal framework around your schools. You know, in Japan, we rented our facilities from Japanese schools, so you had to keep the relationship with those Japanese partners working, and doing it in Japanese as a woman, and it's just extraordinary.
Keep throwing things in there.
Absolutely, just making it up as you go along, really. And yeah, and then here in the Netherlands, I mean, it's, you know, we've got similar things here as well. I mean, there's always peculiarities. So in our organizational structure here in Holland, we have a works council, which is representatives of the workforce, and they have a very important role to play in advice that's given, approval of decisions. And for some people, that's quite extraordinary, because it's not a union, it's the voice of the workforce coming to play at quite a strategic level in the decision-making process, you know. So those nuances are just fascinating, and they're different, wherever you are.
There's some frustration there as well at points, I'm sure, Sue.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
Okay, great. A couple of quick fire questions for you, Sue. So as a school head, what's the question that everyone asks you?
The first thing that comes to mind is when do you sleep, and do you go home at night? I think unless you're actually sat in this seat, people just think it's mad, the amount of time that you put into the organization or into the school, and what you have to do that's outside of your job. And like, you know, like last weekend, I was here at 8 o'clock on Saturday, letting in the man who cuts the trees down. And it's just, you have to do it in order for the whole place to run. And yeah, so those would be questions, I think. Where do you get your energy from is something I get asked a lot. And I just think, you know, that's, you have that level of energy when you love what you do and you look after yourself, and you're actually really focused on getting the right things for the students, and finding really great stuff every day that's going on, and keeping yourself focused on that.
Next question. What piece of feedback or criticism has most fueled your learning?
I've had 2 times when I've been in a situation where I've been given feedback that's taken the rug completely from under my feet, and it was soul destroying, actually, in both cases. And it was feedback that members of staff had given my line manager. And I think in both of those situations, it taught me the importance of being so careful as a head what you say to people, and how you come across, and unfortunately sort of watching when you let your guard down, because it can so easily be misinterpreted. So that was something that I learned the hard way, and I thought I was pretty good at that, but you know, I needed to do that even more cautiously, particularly at times when staff are under stress. They're looking to you, and if you happen to say something or behave in a particular way that can be misinterpreted or it's different, that's what got in the way in those particular cases, I think. And also I learned the importance of investing in that relationship with my line manager. So if you don't have a really good relationship and you're not communicating on a regular basis about what's going on, you can very easily get misunderstood, and it's nobody's fault. It's just because you're busy people. And then the other bits of feedback that I found really helpful as a leader was when I went for interview, actually, and wasn't successful, but was very close to it. And I had one interview where I had an hour Skype conversation with an HR manager, and it was unbelievable, the feedback. It was very candid, very clear. It acknowledged the additional things you have to do as a woman in those senior jobs. And I'd never been able to have those sort of conversations before. And she just invited it and gave me things to think about going forwards. And then also another job that I didn't get, but the CEO rang me and just gave me fantastic feedback about what had gone well, what he would have liked to see more of. And, you know, just then generously finishing the conversation with, you know, I hope our paths cross again, and I hope you find something that's going to make you happy, you know? So those times really. So it made me realize that you can get some real gems of feedback, but you've got to ask for it.
I was going to just to rewind slightly. It's mentioned there about what the responsibility of you as a leader being a woman.
Yes,
that's what you said. So again, I know we're going a bit off piece here, but just can you kind of elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, these were positions where I was trying to secure a principal position 3 to 18, and I've got a primary background, so one of the things that you have to try and overcome at that level of interview is reassure people that you're able to lead at secondary level as well, and that you have business acumen as well that can support. And invariably, my experience has been that I've been the only woman at the shortlisting stage, and that it's been a male-dominated panel. And I think that you have to learn to overcome some of the issues that happen within that kind of forum. So, for example, you know, if you have to do a social dinner, my experience has often been that the topics of conversation have been topics that I find really difficult to access, and I've had to work really hard to find common ground. And I've usually used my traveling or my interest in literature to get some kind of common ground, because it's been more about sport and football and stuff. What this particular woman did was she acknowledged that that's the forum that I was dealing with, and she was giving me feedback of how what I said landed with the panel, and what the conversation had been afterwards. And that was absolutely fantastic for me to hear, because she was very, very straight about it. And she said, these are the things where their questions were coming up. And of course, it was secondary, you know. They're worried about your secondary knowledge and background. She said they weren't really confident that you were picking up the clues and the cues around the school. And, you know, there were instances where you weren't picking up comments that were being spoken across the panel. And it was just behaviors that were happening in that forum that I was missing, because that's not necessarily how I would communicate with my colleagues in my current school. But I need to learn how to do that. And she was being very explicit about it for me. And it was nuggets of information, really helpful. Yeah.
Great, thanks for elaborating there, Sue. So last question, and you've kind of touched on us a little bit about advice for yourself as a leader, but if we take you back to the start of your career, what advice would you give yourself? I think one of the big things would be to just enjoy the ride, you know, and like really be consciously looking at what works well on a daily basis. Particularly when you first go into headship, you can get so absorbed in the kind of operational day-to-day stuff and the problems, you know. And it was one of the things that my deputy and I did when we first started here, was every day before we went home, we talk about 5 great things that we'd seen. And it was getting into that habit. And I wish I'd done that earlier. And I think I would have seen a lot more of the great things that were happening in the schools. I you know, it's kind of that practice. And then on that theme really of looking around, it's just like those connections with people outside your organization. So having a network of friends or professionals. And like last week, I was on a webinar with this leader from Mongolia and from Oman, and it was just joyous. And I was thinking, like, I should have done that more when I was in my early stages of leading, just to keep my head up. And then and linked to that is just finding like-minded people. So they may not be in your organization, but they'll be around, and making sure that you've got opportunity to talk about the things that excite you about education. Thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being so open and honest and really informative with your discussions. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, Nick. Thank you.
If you are interested in elevating your leadership practice in partnership with Pursue through our coaching and leadership development packages, or would like to connect to discuss any of the topics on the show, please send me an email at hello@pursue.com or visit our website at pursue.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Nicholas Mackay or Pursue. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a rating and spread the word. We are proud to be developing a truly global community. Take care and look forward to speaking to you again soon.